Hey, Matthew.
How you doing, Mark? This is Matthew Lee of Inner City Press at the United Nations, speaking with, as always.
Sorry. Pardon the interruption, Matthew. This is Mark Goldberg with UN Dispatch, the UN and Global Affairs blog, talking to you as I usually am from Washington, D.C.
We've got the bases covered.
All right. So what's going on? Big week, huh?
So yeah, well, everyone has different priorities, but there are a lot of things going on. I guess there's been a breaking news on the Sri Lanka UN front, but
can I interrupt you? Before you start that. So
Please.
As I do normally every morning, I go to my YouTube page, and and I have a YouTube feed for the UN.
Sure.
In my YouTube page, and I check out the UN channel. And lo and behold, I see John Holmes, the sort of head humanitarian affairs coordinator for the United Nations, at a stakeout outside the Security Council. And it's a 3-minute long video clip, but towards the end he takes questions, and whose voice do I hear but?
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it was quite a scene down there. There was at long last. I mean, we'll go to on other matters, of course. But after, I only say it because we've done, I think, the last 2 episodes that sort of led up to this, in which and sort of there had been a request by a number of countries, the EU members, the Mexico, and then last Friday, a week ago from when we're doing this, the U.S. Finally became public with that it was throwing its support, or making public its support, that there be a Security Council briefing on the carnage in northern Sri Lanka.
Yes.
This request was opposed by China, Russia, Libya, Vietnam, Uganda, and Turkey, with Japan surprisingly sort of at least described as somewhat on the fence. But and their reason for opposing it is just a general sort of Sri Lanka is a friend of theirs. They sell, in 2 cases, they sell weapons to Sri Lanka, but more generally, it's viewed as an internal conflict. So although since we have last spoke, actually, a document was leaked to me in which OCHA, John Holmes' operation, estimated, and they called it a conservative estimate, that 2,683 civilians had been killed, not even all of this year, just from January 20th through March 7th in the conflict zone in Sri Lanka. This is a high number, and as I think we said last time, is higher than the number in Gaza, which gave rise to any number of meetings here. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have. It's just seems very strange. And ironically, actually, the 6 countries very much opposing any meeting on Sri Lanka were among the most vocal in saying that meetings must be held on Gaza. So clearly the standard is not the numbers of civilians killed, but the political identity of the killer, right? And I'm against all killers, Mark, just for the record.
Okay.
But so I'm sorry, no. But the main, in terms of news, so and this is actually to the UN, I guess, to the Council's credit. Everyone was saying, okay, there's opposition. They could have called a vote and forced it to be inside the actual Security Council chamber. But yesterday morning, it suddenly emerged that they would hold the meeting, but in the basement of the UN. This is a sort of sleight of hand. They often hold these meetings when they do in the basement in order to hear from NGOs, which they can't up in the Security Council chambers. There's a bunch of rules of who can go in, who can speak, and basically member states can speak other than a few exceptions. So they came up with this provision where the council could meet in the basement in not a formal council meeting and hear from NGOs. What was done yesterday was actually called an informal interactive dialogue, in which it was a council meeting. All 15 members had to be there, and the presidency of the council ran it, but it was done in the basement. And this somehow placated the opponents of the meeting. It allowed the Sri Lankan ambassador to come out after the meeting and say this wasn't really a meeting. In fact, Holmes, Holmes on his way in, I'll set the stage. I said to him, will you speak to us afterwards at the microphone? He said he wasn't sure, and then he turned and he said, this meeting doesn't exist. Which is, that's what passes for humor here in the UN. Let me go ahead.
So I can ask you. So on that YouTube clip of you and John Holmes that I saw, one of the
that sounds terrible. There's another John Holmes, right?
I'm sorry.
There's a John Holmes that's not a humanitarian.
Right.
So,
yeah.
All right. I'm sorry.
Keep your mind. We'll keep the conversation elevated.
Okay. We'll keep it up. It's a Friday. Go ahead.
You seem to push him hard on the sort of figures of how many civilians might be trapped in sort of the Vanu region.
Yep, definitely.
I'm wondering so he responded. He seemed to say that there are 150 to 200,000 civilians trapped, but he didn't really know more of a precise number than that.
You're right. No, and thanks a lot. And I also, I really,
you seemed like, you weren't on camera, but it seemed a little pesky, the way in which you kept.
It's been pesky, and I want to.
You kept hammering on this point.
Sure.
I was wondering sort of why you kept hammering on that
thanks.
point.
It's a very fair question. I do my best not to be pesky, but in this case, I've had to be pesky, and the reason is it's really a sort of during the first part of this conflict, I heard from people in Sri Lanka, actually, that the UN was compiling a number, both of two numbers: how many people had been killed, how many injured, and also how many were still trapped in the zone of conflict. The UN was denying at that time that they were keeping such numbers. Then someone leaked to me the OCHA document that actually has the number, and it's a very specific number: 2,683 civilians killed in the time frame I referenced. When this came out, I ran it. Human Rights Watch has linked to it. It sort of caused something of a stir. And the UN initially said, that's our document, but we didn't feel comfortable releasing it because they're so hard to get access to that area that we can't be positive of the number. That's one thing. But since then, the Sri Lankan government has asked the resident coordinator of the UN in the country, Neil Buell, to essentially disavow the number and admit that the number, can't be verified and is almost basically a Tamil Tiger number, which in Sri Lanka the UN has been willing to let the government say that. Hasn't counteracted it at all. So the reason for the peskiness is that even Holmes himself has taken this strange position where it's his own department's document. And he's saying, but I can't verify the figures, and the document itself says this is a conservative estimate. And by contrast, his office, OCHA, has said repeatedly 300,000 people killed in Darfur. Very round number. I don't want to compare. I don't want to say they shouldn't use that number, but it seems very, very strange to be so shy about this own internal, well-documented, very specific number. And I think it all goes to, in the case of Darfur, the U.S., the U.K., and other major powers want the UN to release a number. And in the case of Sri Lanka, with some exceptions, there's not a lot of pressure for them to release a number, so they don't want to. Mm-hmm. So that's, I want to explain. I'm usually not that pesky with him, but he knew that, and it's sort of, I'm just sort of surprised because I will say he's one of the more, he's at least a UN official that's willing to, explain his position, and he has, I think, here's the one thing I actually wanted, this is maybe something beyond the scope of what happened at the stakeout. I've spoken to I guess I've hit almost at the Holmes level, a senior UN official charged with trying to really solve the problem, and not just the humanitarian side of it, but not the political side, but, And they this is a phrase I think that will grab you, Mark, and maybe others, is that one of the reasons they've been a little slow to the crisis, but there's a growing worry, this gentleman told me on the 38th floor, that after 6 weeks of back and forth and questions and a few strong statements, but really no change in behavior on the part of the government of Sri Lanka, and the Tamil Tigers, they're acting very badly as well, shooting people in the back. There's no question. But the on both sides, they've called for a cessation of hostilities, which there hasn't been. There's been continued bombing by the government and human shield using by the Tamil Tigers. The fear on the 38th floor is that sometime soon the government will haul off and go for a sort of final offensive on this zone. Mm-hmm. We're trying to knock out the Tamil Tigers. In the course of that, tens of thousands of civilians could be killed. In which case, and this was what I found so striking, the guy said to me, and everyone will blame the UN. Which is not, I'm not saying they only care about it for that reason, but I think they've realized there's enough and that's why this document is part of the mix. There's enough of a paper trail here. You and I are always talking about not a decade ago history, Srebrenica, Rwanda. And I don't want to, this is closer to probably a Srebrenica type situation, only in the sense of both of the numbers and of at least knowledge on the UN's part. It knows what's going on. It does a few things, but not much. I want to be honest that it hasn't done what it really can. And I think it's and they're sort of rolling the dice that it's all going to work out. But
I don't think that analogy is appropriate.